She stood in the doorway of the ceremonial hall, watching him place the silver crown on another woman's head. The third time this month he'd chosen someone else to stand beside him. Alara's hands trembled as she gripped the stone archway, her wolf whimpering inside her chest. She'd been his acknowledged mate for 2 years, but he'd never once allowed her to complete a single royal ceremony by his side. Tonight, as the entire pack watched him smile at the beta's daughter, a smile he'd never given Alara, something inside her finally broke. Not her heart. That had shattered long ago. No, this was different. This was the moment she realized she'd been waiting for him to choose her when she should have been choosing herself. The royal advisor whispered her name, gesturing frantically for her to take her position in the shadows where she always stood, invisible and convenient. But Alara's feet wouldn't move forward anymore. For the first time in 2 years, they moved backward, and she didn't stop until the castle disappeared behind her. Chapter 1. The rejection hadn't come all at once. That was the cruelest part. If King Thorn had simply cast her aside when the bond first snapped into place, Alara could have mourned and moved on. Instead, he'd kept her close enough to hope, but far enough to ensure she never forgot her place. She remembered the exact moment she'd felt it, that overwhelming pull during the lunar gathering 2 years ago. She'd been serving wine to the visiting dignitaries, a low-ranking Omega doing her duty, when their eyes met across the grand hall. The bond had struck like lightning, and she'd actually gasped, dropping the pitcher. Wine had spread across the marble floor like blood. King Thorn's expression had shifted from surprise to something darker, something she'd later come to recognize as resentment. He'd acknowledged the bond publicly because the ancient laws demanded it, but he'd made it clear from the beginning that acknowledgement was all she would ever receive. "You will not embarrass me," he'd told her that first night, his voice cold as winter stone. "You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not presume to advise me, influence me, or stand where you have not earned the right to stand." She'd nodded, desperate to please him, certain that if she was patient enough, gentle enough, invisible enough, he would eventually soften. She'd been so naive. For 2 years, she'd watched him parade other women through ceremonies that should have been hers by sacred right. The spring rites, the harvest moon celebration, the treaty signings. Every important moment of his reign, he'd chosen someone else to stand beside him. High-born she-wolves with elegant gowns and political connections. Women who knew how to smile for the crowd and say exactly what the council wanted to hear. Alara had tried to understand. She'd told herself he was protecting her from the vicious politics of court. She'd convinced herself he needed time to accept a mate he hadn't chosen. But tonight, watching him place that crown on Vivian's perfectly styled hair while the beta's daughter gazed at him with practiced adoration, something had finally clicked into place. He wasn't protecting her. He was punishing her for being lowborn, punishing her for being chosen by a bond he didn't want, punishing her for existing in his perfectly controlled world as an inconvenient reminder that even kings couldn't escape fate. The night air bit at her skin as she walked away from the castle, her simple dress offering little protection against the wind. She had no plan, no destination, only the overwhelming need to disappear before she shattered completely in front of the entire court. Her feet carried her toward the forest boundary, past the manicured gardens and marble fountains that had never felt like home. Behind her, she could still hear the music from the ceremony, the sound of celebration for a future that had never included her. Leaving so soon? The voice made her freeze. Marcus, the king's enforcer, stepped out from the shadows of an ancient oak. His expression was unreadable in the moonlight. "His Majesty hasn't dismissed the court yet. You know the rules about Omegas wandering alone after dark." There was no kindness in his tone, only the mechanical efficiency of a man following orders. Alara lifted her chin, something new and fierce rising in her chest. "I'm not wandering. I'm leaving." The words felt strange in her mouth, like a language she'd forgotten how to speak. "And I don't need his permission anymore." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You can't just leave. The bond means nothing if only one person honors it. Alara interrupted, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. He's made his choice every single day for 2 years. Tonight, I'm making mine. She started walking again, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She waited for Marcus to stop her, to drag her back, to remind her that acknowledged mates didn't simply walk away from kings. But his hand never touched her shoulder. When she finally glanced back, he was still standing beneath the oak, watching her go with an expression that might have been respect or might have been pity. She didn't stop to find out which. Chapter 2. The cottage at the border settlement was nothing like the castle. It was small, drafty, and the roof leaked when it rained. But it was hers. Alara had found work at the village healing house within days of her arrival, her knowledge of herbs and natural remedies making her valuable enough that no one asked too many questions about where she'd come from. She'd given them a false name, Clara, and kept her head down. The border settlements were far enough from the capital that news traveled slowly, and refugees from pack politics were common enough not to draw attention. For the first time in 2 years, she could breathe without wondering if she was standing in the wrong place or speaking at the wrong moment. 3 months passed, then 6. Alara learned to sleep without jumping at every sound, learned to smile at the village children who brought her wildflowers, learned to feel something other than the constant ache of rejection. The bond still pulled at her sometimes, especially during the full moon, but she'd gotten better at ignoring it. She told herself that distance was the cure, that eventually the connection would fade into nothing more than an uncomfortable memory. She was almost starting to believe it. Then the soldiers came. They arrived at dawn, their armor bearing the royal crest, their faces grim with purpose. Alara was grinding feverfew in the healing house when she heard the commotion outside. Through the window, she watched them march through the village square, stopping villagers and showing them something. A sketch, she realized with growing dread. They were looking for someone. The healing house door burst open. Clara, you need to hide. Marin, the head healer, grabbed her arm with urgent strength. They're looking for King Thorn's missing mate. They're saying she was kidnapped, that there's a reward for information leading to her safe return. The old woman's eyes were sharp, knowing. That's you, isn't it? You're her. Alara's throat closed. I wasn't kidnapped. I left. Doesn't matter what the truth is, girl. Matters what he's telling everyone. Marin pulled her toward the back room. If those soldiers find you, they'll take you back in chains. The king's been searching for months. They say he's offering enough gold to buy a small territory. But there was nowhere to hide. The soldiers were efficient, methodical, and they had the authority to search every building. When they kicked in the healing house door, Alara was still standing in the workroom, her hands stained green from the herbs, her heart racing like a cornered animal's. Found her, one of them called out, his voice carrying a note of relief that chilled her blood. The captain stepped forward, his expression carefully neutral. Lady Alara, His Majesty has been concerned for your safety. The formal title felt like mockery. She'd never been called Lady when she actually lived at the castle. I'm not going back, she said, but even she could hear how hollow the words sounded. The captain's jaw tightened. With respect, my lady, that's not your decision to make. You are the king's acknowledged mate. Your disappearance has caused considerable disruption to the realm. There are laws, protocols. Laws he ignored every time he replaced me at a ceremony. Alara shot back, anger finally breaking through her fear. Protocols he violated every time he chose another woman to stand where I should have stood. Where was your concern then? For just a moment, something flickered across the captain's face. Discomfort, maybe even sympathy. But duty won out. It always did. Please don't make this difficult, he said quietly, and nodded to his men. They moved fast, giving her no chance to run or fight. Within minutes, she was in the carriage, wrists bound in silver chains that burned against her skin, watching through the barred window as the village, her brief taste of freedom, disappeared behind her. The journey back to the capital took 3 days. 3 days of silence except for the sounds of horses and wheels. 3 days of growing dread that settled in her stomach like poison. The soldiers didn't speak to her except to offer food and water at stops. They treated her like precious, fragile cargo that might break if handled wrong. When the castle finally came into view, its towers piercing the sky like accusations, Elara felt the bond snap tight in her chest. He was close, closer than he'd been in months, and he was furious. She could feel his rage like a physical presence even before the carriage stopped in the courtyard. The door opened, and he was there, King Thorn himself, not bothering to send an advisor or guard. His dark eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "Inside," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Now." Chapter 3. Elara had expected shouting. She'd prepared herself for his cold fury, his cutting words, perhaps even punishment. What she hadn't expected was silence. King Thorn led her through the castle corridors without speaking, his grip on her arm firm but not painful, his expression unreadable. Servants pressed themselves against walls as they passed, their eyes wide with curiosity and fear. News of her return had clearly spread fast. He brought her to his private chambers, a room she'd never been allowed to enter before. The message was clear even before he locked the door behind them. This conversation would be witnessed by no one. 6 months, he finally said, releasing her arm and moving to pour himself a drink from the crystal decanter by the window. His hand was steady, controlled. Everything about him was controlled. 6 months you let me believe you were dead, or worse. I didn't let you believe anything, Elara found her voice, though it shook slightly. I left. There's a difference. He turned to face her, and she saw it then, the crack in his composure. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw tight with tension, his shoulders carrying a weight that hadn't been there before. You vanished without a word, without protection. Do you have any idea what could have happened to you? The enemies I have, the people who would love nothing more than to hurt me by taking what's mine? I was never yours, Elara interrupted, and watched his expression darken further. You made that clear at every single ceremony, every treaty signing, every public moment when you chose someone else to stand beside you. I was just the inconvenient bond you couldn't break, the omega you kept in the shadows so your court wouldn't see weakness. Something dangerous flashed across his face. He set down his glass with deliberate care. Is that what you think? That I was ashamed of you? What else was I supposed to think? The words burst out of her, 2 years of hurt finally finding voice. You never spoke to me, never looked at me, never acknowledged me as anything more than an obligation. You paraded other women through my place like I didn't exist, like the bond didn't exist, like I was nothing. I was protecting you. His roar filled the chamber, and Elara stumbled back a step. He'd never raised his voice at her before, had barely spoken to her at all. Every woman I put in your place, every ceremony I kept you from, every moment I forced distance between us, it was to keep you safe. Safe from what? She demanded. From becoming visible, he said, his voice dropping to something raw and honest. From becoming a target. Do you know what my court is, Elara? It's a nest of vipers. Every alliance is temporary. Every smile hides a blade. The moment they realized you mattered to me, truly mattered, you would have had 100 knives aimed at your back. Elara shook her head, trying to process his words. You expect me to believe you humiliated me for my own protection? I expected you to trust me, he shot back, to understand that I was playing a longer game than you could see. How could I trust you when you never spoke to me, when you treated me like I was invisible? Because speaking to you was dangerous. He moved toward her suddenly, closing the distance between them. Because every time I looked at you, every time you were in the same room, I wanted to claim you in front of everyone. I wanted to crown you myself, to announce to every scheming noble that you were mine, and anyone who touched you would die screaming. But that would have been your death sentence. His confession hung in the air between them. Elara's breath caught. The other women meant nothing, were nothing. Political theater to convince my enemies that the bond was weak, that you were insignificant, that I could be manipulated through better connections than a low-born Omega. His hand lifted as if to touch her face, then fell. Vivienne's father was planning a coup. Did you know that? The Beta and 3 other council members. The spring ceremony when I crowned her. That was the night I had proof. I needed them to believe I was considering her seriously enough to let their guard down. 1 week later, I had them all arrested for treason. Alara stared at him, her mind reeling. You never told me. I couldn't risk it. Your reactions had to be genuine. Your hurt had to be real, or they would have seen through the deception. He looked away, his jaw working. I thought I had time. I thought once I'd cleared out the worst of the threats, once I'd secured my rule firmly enough that no one would dare challenge me, I could finally bring you forward. Make you my queen in truth, not just in bond. But you left. You hurt me, Alara whispered. I know. His voice cracked slightly. I know I did. And I told myself it was necessary, that you would understand eventually, that the temporary pain was worth your survival. But watching you walk away that night, he turned back to face her, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Fear. I felt the moment you crossed the boundary, felt you getting farther away, and I realized I'd made a terrible mistake, not in the strategy, in thinking any strategy was worth making you believe I didn't want you. Then why send soldiers? Alara asked. Why drag me back in chains like a prisoner? Because I'm still a king, and I still have enemies, and you're still in danger every moment you're not under my protection. His voice hardened again, the vulnerability disappearing behind his usual mask. Because bond or not, acknowledged mate or not, you belong here, with me, where I can keep you safe. I don't want to be safe if it means being invisible, Alara said quietly. I want to matter. I want to be seen. I want to be chosen, he finished, publicly, proudly, without reservation. He studied her face for a long moment. Then that's what you'll get. Tomorrow, in front of the entire court, I will crown you as my queen. No substitutes, no political games, just you. Chapter 4. The court was buzzing with speculation when Alara entered the throne room the next morning. She wore the gown Thorn had sent to her chambers, midnight blue silk that made her skin glow, cut in the formal style of a queen. Whispers followed her like a wake as she walked down the center aisle, every eye tracking her movement. She kept her head high, her expression calm, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. At the front of the hall, Thorn sat on his throne, watching her approach with an intensity that made her skin burn. When she reached the dais, he stood, and the hall fell silent. 2 years ago, he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast room, the bond chose for me. It named this woman as my mate, my equal, my queen by right of fate itself. And for 2 years, I have dishonored that bond. I have hidden her, dismissed her, placed others in the position that should have been hers alone. The court stirred, shocked by his public admission. I told myself I had reasons, political necessities, strategic considerations, but the truth is simpler and more shameful. He looked directly at Alara. I was afraid that if I loved you publicly, I would lose you, that my enemies would take you from me the moment they understood what you meant to me. So I tried to love you in secret, in silence, in ways that couldn't be used against us. And in doing so, I hurt you far more than any enemy ever could. He descended from the throne, carrying the queen's crown, not the decorative piece he'd placed on other women, but the true crown, ancient and powerful, wrought in silver and moonstone. Alara, he said her name like a prayer, before this court, before the witnesses of this realm, before the gods themselves, I choose you, not as a political convenience, not as an obligation of fate, but as the woman I want beside me, today and every day that follows. He knelt before her, and the entire court gasped. A king kneeling was almost unheard of. Will you accept this crown? Will you stand with me, not in the shadows but in the light, and let me spend the rest of my life proving that you were always the only choice that mattered." Ilara's throat was tight with emotion. Part of her, the part that had suffered in silence for 2 years, wanted to refuse, wanted to make him hurt the way she had hurt. But she could feel the bond singing between them, stronger now than ever before, and she could see in his eyes that this wasn't theater. This was surrender. "Stand up," she said softly. When he rose, she met his gaze steadily. "If I accept this crown, I won't be a silent queen. I won't stand in the background and smile while you make decisions without me. I won't be decorative or convenient or easy to manage." "Good," he said, and something like relief crossed his face. "I don't want easy. I want you." She nodded once, and he placed the crown on her head. The weight of it was substantial, real, nothing like the delicate ornaments she'd seen on the other women. The moment the metal touched her skin, she felt something shift, not just in the bond, but in the room itself. Power, recognized power. The crown knew its true wearer. Thorn took her hand and turned to face the court. "You're queen," he announced, his voice ringing with authority and something deeper. Pride. The court erupted in applause, though Ilara could see the calculation in many eyes. Not everyone was pleased. Some saw her elevation as a threat to their own ambitions. Others were simply shocked that the invisible Omega had suddenly become the most powerful woman in the realm. As they left the throne room together, Thorn leaned close enough to whisper, "There will be challenges. People who test you, who try to undermine your authority, or prove you're not worthy of the crown." "I know," Ilara whispered back. "Let them try." His hand tightened on hers briefly, a flash of possessive satisfaction crossing his face. But the satisfaction was short-lived. As they entered the private corridor, Marcus appeared, his expression grim. "Your Majesty, my queen, we have a situation." Thorn's demeanor shifted instantly from lover to king. "What kind of situation?" "The northern border. Alpha Kane has been spotted entering our territory with a war party. He's demanding audience. He says—" Marcus hesitated, glancing at Ilara. "He says he's come to challenge your right to the throne." Ilara felt Thorn stiffen beside her. "Kane," he said flatly. "Of course." "Who is he?" Ilara asked. "Someone from your past?" "Someone who believes he should have been king," Thorn said grimly. "My cousin. We were both in line for the throne when my father died. I won the trial of succession, but he's never accepted the outcome. He's been building power in the north, waiting for any sign of weakness. And he thinks your public claiming of me is that weakness," Ilara realized. Thorn looked at her, his expression hard. "He thinks a king who kneels for his mate is a king who's lost his edge. He's wrong, but I'll need to prove that. And quickly, before others get the same idea." Chapter 5. Alpha Kane was everything Thorn was not. Where Thorn was controlled and strategic, Kane was volatile and direct. Where Thorn ruled through careful balance of power and diplomacy, Kane believed in strength and domination above all else. When he strode into the throne room at the head of his war party, every line of his body radiated challenge and contempt. "Cousin," he greeted Thorn with false warmth, his eyes immediately finding Ilara. "I see you finally decided to claim your little Omega. How touching. Tell me, does she warm your bed as sweetly as she serves wine? Or is that why you kept her hidden, worried the court would see she's better suited to serving than ruling?" Ilara felt rage flash through the bond before Thorn locked it down. When he spoke, his voice was ice. "You've entered my territory with warriors at your back, without invitation or announcement. Give me one reason I shouldn't consider this an act of war." "Because I'm not here to make war," Kane said smoothly. "I'm here to offer you a choice. Step down peacefully. Name me your heir, since you and your Omega will clearly produce no worthy children. And I'll let you live out your days in comfortable exile." The entire court went silent. the audacity of the demand stealing the air from the room. "You're challenging the trial of succession," Thorne said quietly. "A trial you lost. Fairly." "I lost because you poisoned the judges against me," Kane snarled, his pleasant mask slipping. "Because you were father's favorite, the golden son who could do no wrong. But look at you now, kneeling before a nobody, letting sentiment make you weak. The realm needs a stronger king, and I'm here to provide one." He turned his attention back to Alara, his gaze crawling over her like something physical and unwanted. "Of course, if you'd like to keep your little mate, we could arrange something. I'm not unreasonable. She could stay on as what would be appropriate? Royal mistress? That seems a suitable position for her breeding." Thorne moved so fast Alara barely saw it. One moment he was standing beside her, the next he had Kane by the throat, slammed against a marble pillar. "Say one more word about her," Thorne said softly, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall, "and I'll rip out your spine and use it to decorate my throne." Kane's warriors surged forward, but Thorne's guards were faster, weapons drawn and ready. The tension in the room was explosive, one wrong move away from bloodshed. "This is your weakness," Kane gasped, clawing at Thorne's hand. "This rage, this lack of control. All because I insulted your pet." Thorne released him suddenly, stepping back with visible effort. "You want to challenge me? Fine. Tomorrow at dawn. Traditional combat, witnessed by the full court. Winner takes the throne and all that comes with it." "Thorne!" "No," Alara started, but he silenced her with a look. Not cruel, but firm. This was King's business. "I accept," Kane said, rubbing his throat and grinning viciously. "And when I win, I think I'll keep your Omega after all. It would be a shame to waste a perfectly good bond, even if it's tied to a dead king." Thorne smiled then, a cold, terrible expression that made even his own guards shift uncomfortably. "When you lose, cousin, I'll make sure your death is memorable. Something the northern packs will tell stories about for generations. A reminder of what happens to those who threaten what's mine." That night, Alara couldn't sleep. She stood on the balcony of their shared chambers, another change that had happened after the crowning, watching the moon track across the sky. Behind her, she heard Thorne enter, his footsteps quiet on the stone floor. "You should rest," he said. "We both should. Tomorrow will be difficult." "He's younger than you," Alara said without turning. "Bigger. The northern wolves are known for their combat skills." "Are you worried I'll lose?" There was something almost amused in his voice. She turned to face him. "Of course I'm worried. I just got you to finally acknowledge me. I'd rather not become a widow before I've properly been a wife." He crossed to her, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. "I won't lose," he said simply. "Not because I'm stronger or faster or better trained, though I am all of those things. I'll win because I have something he doesn't." "What's that?" "Something worth fighting for." His hand cupped her face. "For 2 years, I fought with strategy and politics because I thought that's what it took to keep you safe. Now I understand that sometimes the only way to protect what matters is to show the world exactly how far you'll go to keep it. Tomorrow, everyone will see that truth." "What if something goes wrong?" Alara whispered. "What if—" He kissed her, cutting off her fears. It was the first time he'd kissed her since the bond formed, and the feeling of it, the rightness, nearly brought her to her knees. When he pulled back, his eyes were fierce. "Nothing will go wrong, and after tomorrow, no one will ever question your place beside me again." Chapter 6. Dawn came too quickly. The entire court assembled in the arena, a massive circular space built for exactly this kind of challenge. Alara sat in the royal box, the queen's crown heavy on her head, her hands gripped tight in her lap to hide their trembling. Below, Thorne and Kane faced each other in the center of the sand, both stripped to the waist, both radiating lethal intent. The rules were simple. Shift or stay human, use any means necessary, fight until one couldn't continue. Death was permitted, expected even. The challenger usually didn't survive, and everyone knew it. "Begin!" the judge called, and the fight erupted. Cain shifted immediately, his wolf massive and dark, all muscle and aggression. He lunged for Thorn with killing intent, expecting the king to shift and meet him in wolf form. But Thorn stayed human, dodging with liquid grace and landing a brutal strike to Cain's ribs that made the wolf yelp. "You always relied too much on size," Thorn said calmly, circling his opponent. "Father tried to teach you that brute force isn't enough. You never listened." Cain snarled and attacked again, faster this time. His jaws snapped inches from Thorn's throat. But Thorn was already moving, using Cain's momentum against him, sending the massive wolf tumbling across the sand. The fight continued, brutal and precise. Cain had raw power, but Thorn had skill honed through years of defending his throne from challenges. Every move was calculated, every strike designed to exhaust and diminish. Finally, when Cain was bleeding from a dozen wounds, Thorn shifted. His wolf was smaller than Cain's, but moved like liquid darkness, like death given form. The end came quickly after that. Thorn's jaws locked around Cain's throat, and the arena held its collective breath. One bite, and it would be over. But Thorn didn't kill him. Instead, he forced Cain down, until the massive northern wolf was belly up in the sand, throat exposed in the ultimate gesture of submission. Then Thorn shifted back to human, standing over his defeated cousin. "I could kill you," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the arena. "The law allows it. Everyone expects it." Cain's wolf whimpered, unable to speak in animal form, but clearly terrified. "But I won't," Thorn continued, "because unlike you, I understand that true strength isn't about domination. It's about knowing when to show mercy and when to show force. You'll live, cousin, but you'll live in exile, stripped of title and territory, remembered not as a challenger, but as the wolf who submitted in the sand." He looked up at the royal box, at Alara. "Let everyone here understand. This is what happens to those who threaten my queen. Not death, something worse. You become an example of failed ambition, a cautionary tale, a nobody." The crowd erupted in approval, the display of controlled power and mercy more impressive than simple violence would have been. Cain shifted back to human, naked and humiliated in the sand, and Alara saw the truth in his eyes. Thorn had won more than the fight. He destroyed Cain's credibility, his reputation, his future. After the arena cleared, after the celebrations began, Thorn came to their chambers bloodied and exhausted. Alara was waiting, having dismissed the servants who wanted to tend his wounds. "Let me," she said softly, guiding him to sit while she gathered water and clean cloth. As she cleaned the cuts on his shoulder, his hand caught hers. "I need you to understand something," he said quietly. "Everything I did these past 2 years, the distance, the replacements, the coldness, I would do it all differently if I could go back. But I can't. All I can do is move forward and prove every day that you're exactly where you belong." "I know," Alara said. "I felt it during the fight, through the bond. Your fear for me was greater than your fear of losing." "Infinitely greater," he confirmed. "I can recover from a lost throne. I couldn't recover from losing you." She set aside the cloth and moved to straddle his lap, careful of his injuries. "Then let's make a deal. No more secrets. No more protection through distance. If there's danger, we face it together. If there's a threat, you tell me. I'm not fragile, Thorn. I'm your queen. Start treating me like one." He smiled, genuine and warm, an expression she'd rarely seen. "Yes, my queen." "Good." She kissed him, tasting blood and victory, and the promise of everything they'd denied themselves for too long. "Now take me to bed, and show me what it means to be truly chosen." The coronation ceremony 3 months later was the largest the realm had seen in decades. Alara stood beside Thorn as an equal, not a shadow. When they renewed their vows before the assembled Pax, when he placed his crown beside hers and declared them joint rulers bound by love and law, She felt the bond settle into something unbreakable. There would still be challenges. Court politics didn't disappear overnight, and ruling required constant vigilance. But they would face it together, king and queen, partners in truth. As they walked back down the aisle through cheering crowds, Thorne leaned close to whisper, "Still think about running away?" Alara squeezed his hand, her smile bright and free. "Only if you're running with me." He laughed, the sound rich and rare, and she realized this partnership, this public claiming, this fierce equality, was worth every moment of pain it had taken to reach it. She was no longer the invisible Omega in the shadows. She was the queen who had earned her crown by refusing to disappear. And finally, gloriously, she was home.